Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having lovely, lovely days. You all look, it's interesting being on this side of the room all of a sudden. Like, you're looking at the stage, and now it's like, oh, look at that. There's so many lovely faces. We represent the student takeover, which is, I love the energy. It was me being like, I normally MC like cabaret events and open mics, and suddenly like, well, what am I going to have to do? Be the same person, basically. But basically, yeah, you'll be shocked that we've not got our ties around our heads and that we're not doing this exclusively through TikTok and GIFs. No, we've got what we all think is a really exciting and interesting session, and basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a bit of talking ourselves and sort of presenting a few things about MAs. We're really focused on the MAs, so all of us are either just finishing our MAs, current MAs, students, or have graduated and gone on to PhDs or into other things in the field. So basically we're going to be thinking about public history MAs, because as many of you will know, many of you teach on them. You'll know that there didn't used to be that many of them, and they're sort of becoming more and more popular. There are more of them at more institutions. So we're, I guess, here to sort of facilitate and to be part of a natter about MAs. So I think first things first, it's important for us that there's loads of us, which is very exciting, to introduce ourselves. So I'm Niall. I studied at Birkbeck. I did finished my MA in 2020 in public history. I was looking at my grandfather's experience of the partition of India and how we can use creative methods to tell those kinds of stories, to try and capture the emotion that went with them. And I think that create things like writing techniques, dramatic tension, all of these things can help actually convey the historical emotion that was very really felt by people who went through those experiences. And as I know I haven't shut up about, a performer who has a show that is currently looking at that went up to the Edinburgh Fringe this year in 2022. Thank you for the week. There are 3,000 shows at the Fringe. It's not that impressive.
Did they all get 5 stars in the Scotsman though?
They did not get 5 stars in the Scotsman. I will accept the praise and swiftly hand over.
Hi, I'm Ellie, so I've just finished doing the Public History MA in York. I did my dissertation, I focused on sort of black taxi tours in Belfast and how they present a history of the Troubles, so that's sort of narrativization of the past, so that's...
My name is Morgan. I also just finished my MA at the University of York, and my dissertation focused on the American Women's History Museum, which is the newest Smithsonian that is hopefully going to be built and open in 10 years. And I just looked at what a new national museum means for identity and feminism and that kind of thing in US history.
And she's a specialist in an archive now, so... that's all right. My name's Kirsty. I, again, have just finished my MA in Public History at the University of York. My dissertation looked at the representation of the Northern Ireland Troubles in English military and war museums, which I'm sure, as you can guess, was quite interesting. I am hopefully going to do a PhD at some point, that's a dream, but right now I'm going to start a public engagement job at the History of Parliament, which I'm very, very excited for. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Amy, and I just graduated from the MA in Public History at Birkbeck. My dissertation was based on period drama and historical fiction and how it can radically reshape how people interact and engage with the past. I'm going to chat further, so I won't say anything more about myself.
Hi, now I'm farting all the way these things. I'm Charlie. I'm yet another just finished MA student at the Uni of York. I've covered a whole wide range of topics. My most recent one was chocolate history in York and its sort of status within the public history ecosystem and sort of heritage sector in York. So that's chocolate history, in case I didn't say that there.
Hi, I'm Esther. I'm just going to my second year of my PhD at York. I did the master's programme part-time. I did my undergrad at York, and I'm there. It's like my 7th year at York, so I obviously really like it there. And my PhD looks at history of digital cultures, so it uses the history of Hamilton to think about how we approach history on social media, how we talk about it, how those sorts of digital environments are changing the ways in which the people think about history, but also reflecting on us as historians and how we approach it too. So I'll hand that to Niall.
So as you can see and hear, there's an exceptionally sort of diverse set of interests and very exciting and interesting panelists. So it's going to be wonderful. I'm buzzing to get. I love how the group acted as like a self-perpetuating hype group. Like, you didn't mention this thing that you did. It was really, really sweet. But today is not just about us chatting at you. The structure of the day is going to go a little like this. Very soon I'm going to hand over to Kirsty, who's going to take you through a little poll, and we're going to be thinking about contributing to that poll around ideas around MAs. Oh yeah, good cue. Thinking about MAs and public history. And after that, what we'll be doing is we're going to have a little set of presentations on different MAs at different unis. We've got presentations from people who are at York and Birkbeck, and a little bit that somebody handed over from Queen Mary's. And then we are going to be breaking out into different groups. We've allocated you into the groups, so you don't have to stress. You're going to have a wonderful facilitator per group. And then we'll be coming back and we'll be discussing what you talked about, and then we'll be extending that out, the conversation out to the wider room. So I'll hand over to Kirsty, who's going to talk you through the poll.
Hello, yes. So basically what we want to do is just a wee 5-minute poll at the start to understand what you guys sort of think should be taught or done in your ideal public history master's degree. If you put things in like decolonisation is the most important thing, accessibility, placement, all of that stuff, those one-word buzzwords, they will start appearing and create a wee word map for us so we can see what you guys think is most important. So we've already got stuff, practical, experience, I love it, positionality. So this is something that we're going to come back through our panels, and I'll hand it back over to Naomi in a wee minute to discuss this, but I want you all to almost have this in your head. Like, okay, right, this is what everybody said. And this is what everybody said coming from lecturers or coming from practitioners and all this stuff. And then we as students might challenge it a wee bit, might generate a wee bit of discussion to sort of change your ideas slightly. Or we might not, we might just absolutely sit there like, yeah, no, you guys were right, that was great, thanks. But yes, I'll hand it back to Naomi now, thank you.
Okay. Keep this in your mind. We're going to be coming back to these ideas throughout the day. I think we've already been touching on these ideas, and obviously there was always going to be overlap across the different sessions. But keep these different ones. We're just trying to relate them to MAs specifically within public history. But of course, you can think more widely as well. I'm now going to hand over, talking of MAs specifically, to Amy and Charlie, who are going to introduce some different kinds of MAs in public history.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about the MA at Birkbeck in public history. And I think I'm going to just start with like my background, then talk about why I chose Birkbeck, and then just a little bit about the structure and content, just to cover all bases. So my background is I worked in heritage for about 10 years. I wanted to progress in the field of heritage and history, and was advised that I needed to do an MA. I was advised to do heritage management or museum studies, but for me, they felt too narrow, and that's just a personal opinion. No, I wanted the history. So Birkbeck, a wonderful cause. And why? Yeah. So I wanted career progression, and it also represented a return to study. I'd done my first degree in something quite different in science. But I always should have done history, so this was like a return to study. Why I chose Birkbeck is, I'm not sure, I think most people know, maybe not. They do evening study, so it's an evening study course. You can do it part-time, full-time, but it means that you can work during the day and study at night, which really appealed to me because I couldn't afford to take time off to do a degree. I couldn't afford to go part-time, and London is expensive. I needed to pay my rent. So having it as an evening study was just really accessible, and also the payment method. I wasn't eligible for a loan, but you can pay in instalments, you can do direct debit payments, which I think is quite unique to Birkbeck. I've not seen it anywhere else, and that's also a reason why I couldn't have done a master's if I had to pay for it or fund it myself. So I think I just want to say that the MA at Birkbeck is just really accessible, and I think it helps to bring people in who wouldn't normally kind of study history, and it's not just history, it's across the board. And I think I'm grateful to Birkbeck that they do so much investment in lifelong learning, because I think it's going to bring people in that we need to hear from, like working class voices and that sort of thing. The course structure is quite interesting. It's like a nice marriage between theoretical and practical. You've got 2 compulsory modules, the standard, what you need to do, and then you have a choice of public history modules. I did public history in practice, where you got to do your own project. I also did the heritage module, which was really fun. And then you've got, so I need to check my notes because it's been a while. And you've got 2 option modules, which I think is really cool compared to other MAs. I think it's quite prescriptive, whereas in the Birkbeck one, you could choose from across the department, so you could kind of pick and choose and kind of dabble in different areas of history, which I think is very important for a public historian. And then you've got the research dissertation, which, like I said earlier, I did on period drama. My class, we did a wide range of different topics, but Julia was my supervisor. She's great. And it was very interesting. I would recommend. But the fact that I could do period drama, I feel like it's a different kind of topic that you would be able to in standard history. But I think it just has the same, it's quite important to look into. And I think that's kind of my experience. Other to recommend it, I think. It's a very good course.
Great. I think my introduction will sound a bit like a ringing endorsement as well. But yeah, so hi, as I said, I'm Charlie, and I did just recently finish the course along with these lovely people here. So in York, I think sort of to begin, I'll start with breaking down my introduction to sort of 4 sections. So we've got the sort of pre-application thoughts and my background, and then I'll go into the course itself, followed by sort of connectivity of the course within the city and uni at large, and then I'll sort of finish up with how it's impacted my professional and personal development. So to begin with, I first heard the term public history when talking with Jack Cubitt in York, who I think actually set up the course. But he was my supervisor for my undergrad dissertation on horrible histories as a mode of public history, which was fab to write and got me through COVID. But he sort of introduced the idea of doing an MA in public history as the natural follow-on from the ways I was thinking about history. It was totally different to what I'd done for the first sort of 2.5 years of undergrad study. And something I didn't think I could go back to. Then sort of, I think I was expecting public history to sort of expand my avenues in terms of careers, but then also to, I guess, draw upon more of the theory that I had started to unpack in my undergrad dissertation. So the course itself in York is split around sort of half a series of 4 20-credit modules, for which you do each do a 4,000-word essay, and then there is the rest of it is sort of 80 credits of a research dissertation that's 20,000 words, just like the York course. So the first of the 20-credit modules is an elective, but then the second one is a reflective essay on sort of your placement experience, which I think is a really key part of the York course. The other 2 4,000 word are, one is in the autumn, one is in the spring. The autumn is very much about grounding you in sort of these public history ways of thinking. I think a lot of us would have referenced the Groot's sort of book on Jerome's book. But yeah, things like, for example, Laura Jane Smith's authorised heritage discourse, which I think probably all of us have drawn upon at some point. And then, of course, the research dissertation. I think one thing that I really wasn't expecting was the way in which the course connected into the York the heritage sector as a whole. The placement aspect, through placements organised by the Institute of Public Understanding of the Past, or IPUP, as I think it's been referred to a couple of times. Lots of them were in York, but then I think some of us went to Dorset, some of us went to London, all over. It really connected us to the city itself, and I think that's really a benefit to the non-standardisation of public history courses that we'll come on to in a sec. How it can sort of tie us into the sector before we've even left the university. An unexpected benefit was that sort of, because I teach sort of Lindy Hop on the side as a dance, it meant that I could really tailor some of the essays to sort of reflections on how dance lessons in York use history. So a couple of those ways in which the essays you've formed them with the help of your supervisor. That's one thing that I loved about the York course. Yeah, overall, it was a really great sort of chance to develop academically, but then sort of looking beyond that, tying into sort of giving me the placement experience. I'll just quickly read out the experience of Kaylee from Queen Mary's. She sort of said she couldn't, unfortunately, she couldn't be here due to the, yeah, do you want to hold on? That's okay. she said that the Heritage Management Master's Programme at Queen Mary's University of London is done in partnership with Historic Royal Palaces. The course structure allows full and part-time students to participate in similar opportunities with a mixture of business and heritage theory courses, allows students to develop academically and professionally due to the skills they enhance through the placements, and students witness the level of public engagement with the history and heritage presented at the sites, and how to enhance engagement levels. Thank you very much. A glamorous assistant. So, in terms of some of the comparisons, I think we sort of talk through some of the key differences, and I think the main one is the difference in title. As I sort of fed into earlier, the fact that, you know, your MA Public History is in the singular, yours is in the plural, whereas the Queen Mary's is Heritage Management, which sounds on the face of it like a very different course. And even though we were drawing upon the same sorts of topics and thoughts, we were then sort of dealing with that in a very different way. I think your course didn't have a placement, whereas ours did, but then you also had sort of trip. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the thing about Birkbeck not having a placement is most of the people are already working in the industry, so they don't need the placement, they need the other side, so offering a placement wouldn't really be suitable, but
it felt very much like each of our degrees was aiming towards maybe a different sort of student or prospective student sort of demographic, and also sort of again located specifically within the city in which they were. I think yours in the Queen Mary University University of London course was very much tied with the sort of historic royal palaces, which meant that the lessons and the placements drawn were very situated around sort of ideas of managing heritage, whereas the York one was localised within sort of York's heritage environment, I guess. And I think that reflects public history courses at large, I'd say, as MAs, is that whereas speaking to some of my other fellow students studying modern or medieval histories, there was more uniformity in their courses, whereas I think public history, the non-standardised means that we can have a bit more connection to the heritage environments in which we work. And I think we've already covered the accessibility and part-time arrangements. So thank you very much.
So what we're going to be doing is thinking about the ideal MA and basically going away and trying to build the ideal public history MA. It's very exciting that they're non-standardised, and this is obviously just a thought experiment coming together. Many of you teach on these subjects. Many of you, after hearing these introductions, will be like queuing up to enrol on these subjects. So like just basically having a get together, having a think about what is the role of a public history MA? What should it do for students? What should students do for it? Should they be on placement? Should they not be on placements? Do we need this flexibility? Do we need more standardisation? What do public history students do once they've graduated, like kind of thing? Why are they doing it? And what can it give them, and what can they then be contributing back in towards the field? And those kinds of ideas, and of course many others that I'm sure you'll come up with. Each of the facilitators is going to be sort of contributing to an overall Jamboard, which is very exciting, so we can sort of corroborate, cross-reference your different ideas, see which ones seem to be popping up again and again, see which ones maybe you're like, wow, that only came up once, and then we are going to be discussing that when we come back, and then we'll be discussing it with you, of course. We'll be discussing it with everyone. So that's it. So welcome back. I hope you had lovely discussions. I had the privilege of being a fly on the wall throughout your discussions. Loads of interesting things happening, lots of like very passionate, gesticulatory conversations with big arm gestures, which is the prerogative of any person working in the historical field, I think, to have big arm gestures. There were some very interesting silences of like questions being put out there and people being like, which was fantastic to watch. So basically, for this next stage, what we're going to do is we're going to have a natter amongst ourselves and get sort of insights from us. We've been speaking to you, but we're going off of questions that we've sort of taken from these little sessions we had with you. And thank you so much for contributing, and thank you very much to our brilliant facilitators for facilitating. As sort of host, I guess I get the privilege of kicking us off with the first question. Something that really struck me throughout it, and it's a very vague question to kick off, but I think it's one that's been popping up again and again in different ways, and it was obviously going to come up for the MA specifically, was why a public history MA? It's why public history. Don't panic, public history MA leaders. I'm sure the students and recent graduates have answers for this. But it's something that has popped up, and why public history in the first place? So I guess that's my first question to the panel. What do we think? Why public history MA?
You've got the microphone, Charlie.
I think, so I could take a really big answer to this and try to get deep and academic, but to me it's applied history. So many people when they do history at undergrad, their parents, their relatives, their teachers say, why history? Why bother doing history? You say public history, you say, well, what's that? It's applied history, and it's the ways in which the past is actually being used. So I think it's just interesting from a purely just practical perspective of, oh yeah, I'm actually thinking about uses of the past. There's an inherent utility about public history, which I personally really enjoy thinking about, which is, I guess, what got me into public history as a field. So yeah, I just have that observation really. I think it's really interesting that we draw this division as, or not necessarily us, but people draw a division of academic history as some sort of ivory tower, but we're the ones trying to break down the drawbridge. You know, like, come on, history's interesting and it's useful. So.
Yeah, just to come off the back of that, I think one thing that I noticed in discussion with fellow panelists, but also in the breakout group, there's an element to which sort of public history kind of implies that the rest of history is inherently private or sort of inaccessible. But sort of just take a step back within the sort of application process of the course and also the MA up in York, I noticed that there was a tension between people who were excited and really engaged with the theory and those who had seen that the public history sort of label appealed to them especially due to the practicality. I guess their purpose for why public history was, well, it's the one with the placement embedded. And I think they got frustrated, especially early on, with this sort of idea that they needed to be grounded in the, I think it was Alex who mentioned the term sort of self-criticality, and of reflecting on the practices and the processes by which the heritage is created and the narrative sustained. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
I think too, as an academic field, public history is really valuable because as we've learned this entire conference, there's a lot of big questions that get asked of what public history is, or what are the ethics of these processes, or what do these organizations do, and by studying it, we get to try and answer that, whether that means having conversations or writing a dissertation. We're trying to tackle some of these big questions and hopefully better the work that public historians do broadly, and historians do broadly, and practitioners do broadly. We just get to contribute to that field better. Yeah.
Just also what Charlie was saying, and our group, when we were talking about the fact that then means there needs to be some sort of setting of expectations, I think, for students. We were talking about the fact that I think there's some people come in with an idea that it's a more vocational course than it is, sort of thinking that, oh, it'll lead on to, I can easily get a job in, you know, some sort of public history, when in reality there's value in it being an academic concept of its own, rather than just being, it's not vocational in and of itself. I think that's sort of one thing we were touching on.
Any other thoughts? I'll sort of crack on with our next question. Yeah, I'm also struck by the way in which it's... I'm struck by how flexible it felt when I got to do it, like when I was studying my MA. The things I got to submit and the ways I got to approach submitting coursework was so different from what I'd experienced at, say, I studied at Edinburgh for my undergrad, and I couldn't have imagined being able to do that, and I don't know if that was just because I was at Birkbeck, but it sounds like, talking to everyone here, that there is something about a specific public history course, and it might just be that's because how public history courses are at the moment. They may change and morph over time. There is a bit more flexibility and creativity. I know it came up a bit that people were talking about could they be more creative, but the next question I wanted to ask was, sort of because we don't have much time, was many of the people in this room who are teaching these courses understandably didn't study them themselves because they're like on the front line of making them. What do we think, as students who have actually studied public history masters, what do we think is the most important thing? I think that's something I'm very interested in. So I'll put that out to the group. What do we think the most important thing? Not the top, but what did you've done it now? Like, well done, congratulations to us all. What do we think was the most important thing we took from it, or if you had your ideal public history MA, what would the most important thing, or something that comes into your head, be? Anyone got that?
It's so flexible, as everybody says, and I think flexibility is key. We have to be flexible in it because, like my group, we're having a great discussion over people coming with different, not only wants, but also different accessibility needs and all of this stuff. We were talking about like public engagement needs to be more, but some people might not want to engage with the public. And I think this is what everybody has already said. It gives the flexibility, and that is the most important thing to me because it's allowed me to grow into my own wee public historian, I hope, which is different from every other public historian up here. But we are all our own people, and we've been able to do that because all of our degrees have been flexible and have allowed us to nurture our own specialisms. Now, if somebody wants to stop me from rambling, that would be lovely.
On a slightly different note, I think obviously there's the flexibility, but in terms of the teaching, I think, in my experience, I think having sort of the first core module being the theory and then going on to the practice, I think I enjoyed both of them for different reasons, but I think there was an importance in having both of them and not just a focus purely on one of them, because I think it sort of gave weight to both of them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking.
I think it's really interesting though about how we've emphasised the breadth of public history, not only here and with the topics that we've discussed with our own courses, but also within the term, like we did earlier on today. But I think within that there are challenges as historians. I feel like my impression is that most public historians were traditional historians who have developed an academic interest in the more public-facing things. That means, though, that there are gaps. So, for example, something came up in our group was, for example, digital media training. Your traditional standard historian probably doesn't understand Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and I may have a bias because that's what I'm trying to make my public history area. But there is probably more space for us as public historians to work with other departments in our universities more closely. There may be other topics and areas that they could really provide and really enrich our understandings of public history, new frameworks and theories and understandings that we actually need that will help our own studies. So I think one thing, and it's why I chose York for partially for my PhD, because we've got a great interactive media department. But I wonder if there's more space for that broadly with regards to public history sort of postgraduate courses. Maybe bringing in not just practitioners from the field and the fields that we work with, but maybe neighbouring departments do guest lectures, do extra training in things we might not think are public history, but actually those students might really appreciate understanding a bit more of.
Anyone else got any thoughts to add? We all good? Well, I suppose, what was I going to say? We've only really got time for me to ask you one more question as a group, or us one more question as a group. What do we think about theory versus practice? So, like, obviously, lots of people talking about York being really, not versus, but like, how do you place weight on either? Because obviously both, I think it's clear that we all feel that they're all important, or they're both important. But a lot of people for York wanted to do it because it was practical and it had that placement. It sounds like people got a bit frustrated that there wasn't an initial move towards that practical element, and you had to root in the theory first. And if that's not where your head was at, it could have been quite confusing. But there is no placement. And to come back to what you were saying earlier about most people at Birkbeck are already working in it, some people on my module were when I started, but I certainly wasn't. And I was hoping that it would get me into those spaces, or would be a vehicle towards me moving into it. So a placement might have been something that would have attracted me more to Birkbeck kind of thing. But I don't regret that it didn't have a practical element. I was working 4 days a week anyway, like kind of thing. Like, so where do we sit as a group on that, on theory versus, yeah?
Something that my discussion group talked a lot about is the various ways that you can develop practical skills. So placements are obviously a really successful way to do that sometimes, but it's important that you set up placements in a way that works for both the placement organization and the students, and sometimes that takes a lot of years of building relationship and practice and trial and error, but working as a program to help those placement institutions actually be able to host students is a really helpful direction, we think, in developing a public history MA. But in addition, you don't necessarily need a placement to build practical skills, because we talked about ways you can learn things like how to apply for funding, or how to, maybe it's just more imaginary, but how to develop social media or write blog posts or things like that. And just because you're not working in a physical organization or with a placement host doesn't mean a program can't facilitate some of those more practical skills, which, as we're talking about public history, does seem to be more practical and applied.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Your undergrad that you did sounds amazing, and it hit all of those things. And I do think that maybe, I don't know if Newcastle have gone through with it, but I knew a lecturer that was going to start public history at Newcastle, and they were talking about how things were going to be on, like, applying for funding and things. And I do think that sort of stuff would be beneficial, because I have no idea how to do that. I basically stumbled through my ethics form with my lovely supervisor and Victoria being holding my hand like, no, come on, you don't know, that's not what you want to do. And I'm like, okay, right, I can do this. But I think from my group, and we had great discussions on how important the practical side of it is, and placements are, and getting out there are. But I will say, this might be because I would love to be an academic. I loved the theory. The theory was so great. If I didn't have the theory, I'd have gone into these placements and not had a clue. I'd have been able to gain skills and like engaging with the public and things, but I would have had no grounding to be able to reflect on myself, to reflect on institutions, to reflect on any of this. So I definitely think that it's good to push more practical elements, absolutely. It's good to have things like placements or assessments that are more practical. But I am here waving my flag for theory, waving my flag for literature, because for me, if I didn't have it, as somebody that's come totally new to public history at the start of my Masters, I'd have just been having a grand time at these placements. I wouldn't be thinking about anything, really.
You guys happy? Well, that's kind of perfect timing. Timekeeping as students is one of our most excellent qualities, as you all know. Basically, this is the opportunity to open the floor. It's questions many of you have taught us, many of you might have been adjacent to courses where we were placed on your placements, kind of things. Do you have any questions for us? As recent graduates, yes, first hand up.
I think what you're doing is great and should be done by all master programs before they plan the next year courses, so that we're not only asking your feedback and course evaluation, and okay, so we put them in our drawer, but we make you part of deciding what courses work best. In addition to the partners, working with your museum partner to, well, this course is interesting, I will need that. So this discussion should not be simply a discussion, it should be part of the of building a curriculum in master program. It might be difficult to convince some colleagues, but this is what we should all do.
I imagine we agree with that. Thank you so much for that contribution. Yes?
The main word in the word cloud was collaboration. And we often talk about collaboration in our research, and we talk about collaboration in our impact, but much less so do we talk about it in our teaching, particularly curriculum design. And so, yes, this is very inspiring to think about how our curriculum in public history could be co-produced, how we could be working more with students, current students, former students, and potential students, as well as partners within the heritage sector, within community organisations, to build programmes that actually serve all of us. That, however, comes up against some institutional barriers within universities and the way universities design programmes, pass programmes, do assessments and so on. But I think that if we were talking about kind of a utopian vision for a public history MA, that would be amazing.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I can only see how that can be mutually beneficial, because I run like workshops now, and a lot of it's to do with like, often it's working with artists who are new or thinking about using history in their practice a bit more actively and taking the time, like we all have at various points in our careers, to really just sit and think about it. And if I'd been part of designing courses, I can only think it would have helped me when it came to planning these kinds of moments with other students kind of thing, if I'd felt like that was something, and it's also something you can put on your CV, like, as cynical as it sounds, like, to say, if you're dealing, say I was to work with a theatre company kind of thing, that were like, to ask me and to talk about those things, I think, oh, well, I was part of designing these courses, so I have thought critically about those with other academics, not in a hierarchical sense, but like, as a colleague, essentially, so, yeah. Do we have anything else to input on that one? There's another question over there. Amazing, yeah, go for it.
But I just want to say, because when you sat on way too many sides of this this table. So I was like the OG public history MA. No joke, literally first cohort. But I've also taught on some stuff, and I'm now in a heritage institution. One of the things that's really wonderful to see, and what you were talking about, Kirsty, was the theory side of that, and now taking the placement provider side. One of the things that we notice in particular is how wonderful that is to guide what we do, and I think that is as much for those who are designing the MAs as those who are doing them, is that we feel like we can contribute something to the conversation there. As you say, it's mutually beneficial. We obviously try and help you develop skills, but we also know that you have like a reflective piece to write at the end of that. So being able to guide you through that is really wonderful, and knowing that you have some theory behind you, so we're not just throwing stuff at you, is great. So that was the comment, just more like, well done. The question that I had is, one of the things I've mentioned in the group is that what I would love to see come out of these MAs is that we talk a lot about things that are wrong, right? Things that need to be changed. And I would love to see students come out of these MAs and feel like they can disrupt, shape, move, do things. And my question here is, what do you feel like first of all, do you feel empowered to be able to make those disruptions? And if you do, what do they look like to you? What do you feel like you'd like to go forward and try and do?
So I think absolutely the MA in public history, oh my god, I have enthused about it on open days. I talk about how incredible it is, how much it's changed me and how I think of the world, how I understand things in the news, in media, in museums, how I understand how things are written in active and passive voice, all of this stuff. And I think that depending on what day you meet me on, I will either say, yes, I am ready to get into this world, and I am ready to shake things up, and I'm ready to help with reconciliation, and I'm ready to teach English people about Ireland. And on other days, I'm there like, oh, the institutions don't want me to, I can never get in. So yes, it's empowering, it's great, but I think there is a big bit of realism every now and again, where it's tough. It's really tough. And I think that doing my placement with a sort of local group of museums showed me how tough it is to make those big changes. So yes, absolutely. MA course for me empowered me, but also made me a wee bit pessimistic about the world.
I had a slightly similar experience. For my dissertation, I sort of interviewed a couple of the people who were key figures in your sort of chocolate heritage, I'm going to call it ecosystem, but that was the term I used. But there was one person who shall remain nameless who used to work as an archivist for a big chocolate company in New York, and I was going to interview them. And as soon as I sent over some questions that sort of gently tapped into some of the more difficult sides, and especially the decolonisation efforts within the history of chocolate and how it was presented in New York, they very quickly backed away and sort of didn't want to take part in any interview that would involve criticism of that company's policy or its past, the colonial nature of its past. And this was reflected in other sort of more corporate heritage endeavours in New York. So not to end on a downer, but I did notice that my position as a researcher was very different from, in sort of professional heritage, was very different from the ability I had to bring up critique within elements of public history in that regard. But yeah, that's a bit of a down to end on, sorry about that.
We've got to raise us up, I think.
I was going to go really positive, because I feel like the older I get, makes me more radical, and I'm kind of annoyed with how I see the world, and I want to change it, and I feel doing the public history MA, especially with Julia supporting at Birkbeck, kind of gave me the skills and the confidence to be like, when I'm in the room with people, I'm going to be like, no, what are we doing about that? Why are you talking about history like that? Why are you forgetting a whole group of people or communities? And it's kind of made me feel really positive that I can make a change, and I'm always ready to be disruptive. So if anybody wants to, I'm always ready to be like, no, this isn't fair, and we need to kind of take a stand and bring more people into public history. And the way I try and go about it is just to be supportive, because I think from the History at Risk panel, what was really interesting is solidarity. I think we need solidarity in the movement and in history as a whole, and I think we need, it's just solidarity.
Well, I was just going to add off of that I think that at least my experience with the MA did teach me the realities of some of the hardships and challenges in the field, but in some ways it also really equipped me with the kinds of questions to ask and how to reframe those challenges. So just like you just said, as I go into the field now, I feel more confident because even though I know there's challenges and I at least have seen them and I have some experience around them so that I can move into the future, hopefully making a positive impact and disrupting some systems.
Take down councils.
I guess I get the joy of rounding us off with ending on this tremendously positive wave. I'm definitely more angry than I used to be. You look at things so much more critically. You're like, no! Our public history MA redefined what I thought history was after studying it for 4 years in a different uni, kind of thing. That's not meant to be an attack on my old uni, but that's what happened. And we've obviously so far today been talking a lot about what public history is and if there's even a point and should we call ourselves public historians. This definitely isn't an answer to that, but I think it's really interesting that we've all taken the time here in this group and had the privilege and the luck to sit and just think about history from this specific lens and whatever that sort of hodgepodge is, because we've all agreed that you can't agree on what public history is. But something quite similar seems to have come out of it. We all seem to be sort of reflecting on wanting to be more radical, analysing the world differently, thinking about institutions and the news differently, and then wanting to be quite active within that. And I did the public history MA thinking it would lead me into museum work, lead me into policy work. I never thought that it would be influencing my career in the arts. I just didn't think that would be happening, and I think that my thesis in my MA is at the core of why I've been lucky and successful with shows I've been doing, kind of thing. Taking that time to think critically about the history that I'm going to use in my art is making people respond to it differently from how they might have done if I hadn't had, again, that absolute privilege of time. So I'm sort of joining the wave of positivity and going, it's definitely impacted me positively as well, in ways I definitely didn't expect at the start of the MA, and maybe that's for all of us, not necessarily just with MAs, but thinking about when we talk about public history, realising there is power in it, there's a lot of positivity coming from it, and taking that forward with enthusiasm, as well as cynicism and grumpiness, which is the important prerogative of any historically inspired person. But that brings us to an end.
I want to just thank our student takeover panelists so profoundly. That was amazing and really insightful, and I've been furiously taking notes, and I fully endorse Thomas's comment about how this should be fundamentally part of our curriculum design. Thank you very much. A big round of applause.